Chapter 6 of The Wheel of Fortune, by a Self-Made Man. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 6. Bert Gets Work on a Maryland Peach Farm. Bert Hawley arrived in the city of Baltimore just as the whistles of many of the large manufacturing establishments were blowing for the noon hour. His train came in at the Calvert Street depot, and he soon found himself on the sidewalk of a big city. A new and strange experience for the country-bred boy. What a noisy, bewildering place, with its rush of vehicles, its rapidly moving electric cars, its eager-looking, hurried pedestrians. The crowd jostled him, and he wondered how he was ever going to find his way about in such a great maze of thoroughfares. It occurred to him that the best thing he could do was to make his way to Light Street, in the neighborhood of what he had been told was the Basin, and inquire for the commission merchant of whom he had letter of introduction from Lawyer Potts. While wondering how he was ever going to get there, he noticed a policeman sauntering toward him. "Will you please tell me how I can find Light Street?" he asked the majestic-looking officer of the law. "Well, you're on Charles Street now. Just keep on going till you reach Pratt Street. Turn 1 block to your left, and then you're at Light Street. You can't miss it because it lies alongside the water." "Is that the Basin?" "That's what it is," answered the cop, walking off. Bert followed the directions to a letter, and he was presently rejoiced to find he had struck the locality he was in search of. "Why, that was easy," he said, smiling to himself at the apparent simplicity of his first attempt to find his way about the big city. He looked at the address on the envelope he had carried very carefully in his jacket pocket. Cunningham and Company, Light Street. He followed the numbers till he came to the building which bore the sign of Cunningham and Company. Entering the store, which was lined with baskets of early peaches from the eastern shore of Maryland, he asked the porter if he could see Mr. Cunningham. The man looked him over, from his shabby shoes to his equally shabby cap, and then shook his head. "Why not?" asked Bert, declining to be put off in that way. "Why not?" replied the porter with some asperity. "'Cause he's gone to Philadelphia." "Gone to Philadelphia?" repeated the boy in a tone of disappointment. He had been foolish enough to build a small-sized air castle in the strength of that letter, which had come to him as an unexpected boon, and now the alluring picture crumbled and vanished like a soap bubble that had burst. The porter gave no further attention to his shabby questioner, and so there was nothing for Bert to do but to return to the sidewalk again. "Hard luck," he muttered disconsolately. "I thought I was sure of an opening." Now he began to realize that the day was very warm, and that he was both hungry and thirsty. "I've got the price at any rate," he mused. "The question is to find a cheap place where I can get something substantial without making too big a hole in my capital." By dint of repeated inquiries, he found a sort of chop house off East Pratt Street, and here he got an excellent meal for 25 cents. Feeling much refreshed and more encouraged to breast whatever disappointments might yet lie in wait for him, he returned to Light Street and wandered up and down the docks that lined the Basin, quite fascinated by the bustle and activity he saw there. The longshore work was mostly done by Negroes, and many of the deckhands on board the Chesapeake Bay steamers were of the same race. But there were also plenty of idle men who found it much pleasanter to sit in the shade of the spile-heads and loaf the afternoon away than turn their hands to useful employment. "Looking for work, young fellow?" asked a well-dressed man, stopping squarely in front of Bert and eyeing him critically from head to foot. "I can't say that I've been looking for it just yet," smiled Bert, "but I won't refuse a decent job if it's offered to me." "Well, how would you like to go over to the eastern shore and pick peaches? I can offer you a 6 weeks' job at any rate." "I'll go," replied the boy readily, for he had a general idea of what the work was. "Step aboard the steamer, then," pointing to a small side-wheeler on the other side of the dock, on which freight was being loaded at a lively rate. Bert, grip in hand, just as he had come from the depot, followed his new employer over the gangplank. "You're from the country, aren't you?" said the man, whose name the boy presently found was Bates. "Yes, sir." "I thought so. I prefer to engage country lads when I can get them. But we have all sorts. Those 3 over there who are going down to work for me are Johns Hopkins college boys. Possibly they are going for the fun of the thing. Though, as a matter of fact, picking peaches ain't such a cinch. Possibly because they need the money. I didn't ask them." They offered their services, and I hired them offhand. I may put them to work on the culling machines, which they would prefer, no doubt, or I may send them to the orchard and keep them there, just as it strikes me. You look kind of husky. Are you used to driving a cart?" "Yes, sir." "Well, I rather like your face. I think I'll let you get your hand in on the machines, and help load and do the driving on one of the carts to the boat landing on the creek." About this time the steamboat got under way. She had a miscellaneous load of freight and a fair number of passengers, destined for various landings on the eastern shore of Maryland. She worked her way among a forest of shipping out into the long and narrow harbor beyond, thence past Fort McHenry, at the mouth of the harbor into the Patapsco River, and finally past a lighthouse into the big Chesapeake Bay, and pointed her nose across. After a 3 hours' sail, she made her first landing. Half an hour afterwards, she entered a wide creek and made fast to a small wharf. Here Bert and a dozen other peach hands were marched ashore. Wagons were in waiting to carry them to the farm, probably a mile away on the bay shore. It comprised about 400 acres, the larger part of which was laid out on a peach orchard. A big lake divided the fields from the orchard. An imposing 2-story brick building, with unusually thick walls, built about the close of the Civil War, was the most conspicuous object on the farm. Adjoining it across the yard was a small 2-story frame structure where the hands were quartered. As the wagons drove up the long road in the gathering gloom of the summer's day, Bert noticed a gleam from the lighthouse on the long, narrow island out in the bay directly opposite, and he could also make out in the far distance the light at the entrance to the mouth of the Patapsco. The novelty of the situation into which he had been thrown so unexpectedly rather charmed Bert, and on the spur of the moment he voted the peach industry a dandy occupation. Perhaps it is, if you really like that kind of hard work. Bert was used to hard farm work, so he was not likely to kick at what lay before him. At any rate, he had a 6 weeks' job at good wages to count on. End of chapter 6.